Okay. Now remember, yesterday we ended the day where we had the Israelites on the border of Egypt, ready to go into the wilderness. So that's where we were yesterday. And today we want to ask the question, where is Mount Sinai? And my answer will surprise you, because I want to focus on why it doesn't matter. Everybody would like to know where is Mount Sinai, but at the end of the day, it does not matter. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, the reality is, there are more than 14 proposed locations for Mount Sinai, proposed by geographers, archaeologists, biblical scholars, travelers from the 19th century, all the way to the present time. Only some of them are marked on this map, and you can see they are scattered from the northern part of Sinai to the central part of Sinai to the southern part of Sinai, and even in Arabia. So I'm not showing you all, but what I want to do is focus on some of the locations. Now, yesterday, we looked at this passage because it tells us that Moses recorded the travels of the Hebrews stage by stage, campsite by campsite, leaving from Ramses and ending in Jordan on the opposite side of the land of Canaan. And that's where the journey ends in the book of Numbers. So we focused on this yesterday, but what I want to do is ask the question, when we try to locate Mount Sinai, there are two different ways you could try to identify Mount Sinai. And I think most people who are interested in this question do their research backwards. In other words, they decide, let's say, that the chair over here is Mount Sinai. And here we are over in Egypt. And they look at the Bible and say, okay, now how do we get from here to there using the Bible? Right? What I like to do is saying, we don't know where Mount Sinai is out there. What we do know is where the journey begins. How can we follow the information in the Bible? Because the Israelites left from Egypt and went to Mount Sinai. They didn't start at Mount Sinai and go back to Egypt. So what is the information? What are the data the Bible provides us to help us locate Mount Sinai? So we have the beginning and we have the end, and we have a few places along the way we can identify on a map. Most of the places, there are 42 places named in the book of Numbers, Numbers 33, from departing Egypt at Ramses until Moses reaches the land of Moab. 42 places. I would say probably 35 of those locations we cannot identify. Only a few can we identify with certainty. We also have the journey as described in the book of Exodus, Exodus 22 through chapter 19. In chapter 19, verse 1, the Israelites have arrived at Mount Sinai. We also have a very important piece of information that tells us that to travel from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea is 11 days' journey. So, and this is Deuteronomy 1 and verse 2. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb, another name for Sinai, by the way of Mount Seir, that is the land of Edom, to Kadesh Barnea. So this piece of information is very important. 11 days' journey from one location to another location. Now bear in mind, in the Bible, you don't travel a distance by kilometers or meters, but you travel a day's journey. How far could you travel in one day? We will look at that in a moment. Now, the identification of Kadesh Barnea is quite certain. And so that is a very important dot on the map, location on the map. So, working with the information or the data provided by the Bible, some important possibilities for Mount Sinai can be established as these are possible geographically. They're in a range that makes sense, and others it's impossible. It does not make sense based on the information provided by the Bible. Now, Numbers 33, we focused on this part yesterday. Starting at Ramses, traveling to Sukkot, Etam, turning back to Migdal, which was by the sea. Okay? Now, from this point, all of these places are mentioned to get from the crossing of the sea to Mount Sinai. Now, if you look at these two lists, it's very clear that the distance from Ramses to the sea is going to be fairly close to Egypt. And there are many more places they camped once they left Egypt till they got to Mount Sinai, which means Mount Sinai must be a greater distance away from the sea than Ramses, where they started. More than twice the distance, maybe 3 times the distance. That's just logical. Okay, we spent some time yesterday talking about the location of Ramses. I'll just briefly review that because there are some people here today who were not with us yesterday. So just a quick reminder that Ramses II, the Pharaoh Ramses the Great, built a new city for himself, named after himself. And it is generally believed that this is the same place as Ramses in the book of Exodus. Exodus 1:11, Exodus 12:13, and Numbers 32. This is where the Exodus began. This is where they launched. And we already, I think, showed that the town of Kantir in Sharqiya is where this is located. We also, yesterday, looked at this map to show you all the different proposed Red Sea crossing locations. And my suggestion is that we were up here. Now, I want to address the question of travel and distance. When the Bible tells us that it's a 11-day journey from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, how far is that? How far can you travel in one day? And I think it's a natural conclusion that when the Israelites traveled from Ramses to Sukkot, and Sukkot to Etam, and Etam to Migdal, that these represent approximately a maximum of 1 day's journey. Could be less, but you can't travel more than 1 day's journey in 1 day, unless you're going very, very fast. Okay, so a day's journey is the distance you can walk in 12 hours a day. Now, most people traveling in ancient times traveled on foot. So, for instance, we have this drawing at Mt Sinai in Sinai. We showed you some pictures there. I'll come back today also. But here you see an important man. He is described as the brother of the chieftain of Syria. And notice he's riding on a donkey, but he's being led by a man walking, and behind him is one of his servants carrying his water. So even this man, who is a very wealthy man, rides on a donkey, but at walking speed, not galloping on a donkey. Okay. Remember, we saw this yesterday too, of this group of travelers coming to Egypt, And once again, notice everybody is walking, except little children are on a donkey, or equipment is carried on the donkey, but everybody is walking. So you don't measure a day's journey by how far you could ride on a horse or a camel or a donkey, but how far you can walk in one day. Okay? Now, maybe about 3 kilometers per hour, or 2 miles an hour for a few of us who may know miles, would cover somewhere around 36 to 37 kilometers a day. But of course, this depends. Are you traveling in uphill? Are you traveling on very difficult desert, sand? In which case, you may not travel quite so far. So a day's journey it's not the same every day, but you get the idea that we're talking about somewhere around 35, 36, 37 kilometers. There have been studies made from the 19th century studying Bedouin and how they traveled in Sinai or traveled in Jordan. And typically they would travel somewhere around 24 kilometers to 37 kilometers a day. This would be the range. So 32 kilometers I would use as an average. 32 kilometers a day or 20 miles a day is a good working average. Some days maybe a little more, some days a little less. Average 32 kilometers a day. So, this we covered yesterday, and the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. We looked at these, and again, for those who weren't there, we'll look at a map in a moment. They moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etam on the edge of the wilderness. That is, they were ready to leave. And this is when God says, turn back, shuv, and camp in front of Pi Hahirot, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon. You shall come opposite it by the sea. So that's this little bit over here. Ramses to Succoth, day 1. Succoth to Etam, day 2. Etam to Migdol, day 3. And then how long they were there before Pharaoh's army came, we don't know. May have been a day, a half a day, a week, we're not told. Then we find out, in Numbers 33, they traveled 3 days in the desert of Etam, and then more places are mentioned until we get to the desert of Sinai. So, one other question, is the 3 days in the desert mean the first 3 days mentioned here? Or is it 3 days followed by 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? In other words, are they traveling 8 days or 11 days from the time they cross the sea till they get to Mount Sinai? And this is, again, scholars do not know how to understand this. If the 3 days simply means they traveled 3 days and they did not record the name of the place they camped, or is it the first 3 places they camped? So this will have to be left uncertain. Now, based on the information I've put before you, Ramses to Succoth, and Succoth to Etam, and Etam to Migdol and the sea is 3 days, should cover somewhere around 97 kilometers or about 60 miles. From the sea, where they crossed, to Mount Sinai, 8 or 11 days would be 257 to 354 kilometers, or 160 to 220 miles. Then the other important measurement is from Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea, 11 days journey, should be somewhere around 354 kilometers or 220 miles. Okay, so this is the general information we have to work with. Now we can look at the different mountains and say, do these fit these distances from our various locations? Okay, everybody agrees where Ramses is. 97 kilometers, you can see roughly the distance you could go from Ramses in any direction, or 3 days' journey. And that's why, in theory, the bodies of water along here would be the most likely bodies, whereas you're not going to get here in 3 days. You're not going to get down here in 3 days. And then bear in mind that after the second day, God says, turn back. So that would mean even less distance from Egypt or from Ramses. Okay. Now, we've already talked about yesterday, and again, I'll just review very quickly for some who may be here who weren't with us yesterday, that the Bible names the body of water as Yam Suf, and in the Arabic Bible, it rightly translated as Bahr Suf, because the Van Dyck does not translate this following the Greek tradition, but the Hebrew tradition. It's in the Greek tradition, the Septuagint, that translates this the Red Sea, Bahr Ahmar. So this is what we did yesterday. We'll just very quickly show you the travel from Ramesses to Sukkot, Maschuta, coming to the edge of the wilderness on the road that leads to Canaan, the other road out of Egypt, and it's at this point God says, turn back. Now, again, for all the priests who are here, this makes no sense for us why they would do this, but if you're a priest and you're preaching a message, this makes very good sense, because it shows us that sometimes God does not lead us in the most direct path to where He wants us to go. And sometimes God directs us into difficult circumstances so that we trust Him. And so I think this is the case that God took Israel away from the very easy way. They were ready to leave, and He says, no, I want to give you one more very difficult challenge before you leave. And so they are directed right up to the area where the Egyptian army and the forts are the strongest anywhere. So it doesn't make sense strategically, but theologically, it makes good sense. God is going to rescue His people. Okay. So here is a map. Somebody was asking me earlier, do you have a map kind of showing the whole picture? And this is one map that was prepared for an article I published where you have movement like this. Then up here somewhere in the Balach Lakes or Yam Suf, turning back and coming down south. Now, Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea is almost certainly located right here. Today it is very close to the border of Israel. If you want to go there, it's very, very difficult. I went there only once. It required cooperation with UN, peacekeepers, and so on to get to this location and special permission. But I was there, I think, in 2001 and not since. But if you look at Kadesh Barnea, 354 kilometers, you can see how far anywhere within this circle, South Sinai, even Arabia, is a possibility to go 354 kilometers to Kadesh Barnea, 11 days journey. Now here is the area around Kadesh Barnea today, and it's called the wilderness of Paran. Moses comes to the wilderness of Paran, and here is a good look at Ain Kudirat. Ain Kudirat, as it's called in Arabic. You can see it's very green. There's a wadi, there's a source of water, there's a spring, and the building that you see here is the edge of a fort. there are actually 3 periods where forts were built one on top of the other, and this was built right after the time of King David by the kings of Jerusalem, and it continued to be built all the way down, continued to be used until Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC. So for almost 500 years, there were Judean soldiers here. Hebrew inscriptions have been found here. What they were doing here, we don't know. Perhaps having to do with trade with Arabia, because both Egypt and Israel in ancient times used incense that came from Arabia. And incense was used in the temple worship, much as it's used in the church today. And this would be a very important area for the caravans bringing incense to come to protect the route. So this may be why this fort was here for hundreds of years. You can see water. And in Sinai, there are very few places that have a good source of water. And so it's no surprise that most of the 40 years in the wilderness described in the book of Numbers happened near this location because you have water. Now, there is a popular movement today that believes that Mount Sinai is in Arabia, that is Saudi Arabia. And this is based on a verse where Paul is speaking Galatians chapter 4, verse 24 and 25. And he says, now this is an allegory. I don't know what the good translation for allegory is in Arabic. Misal, yeah, masalan, an idea, a picture, misal. This is an allegory, and he's talking about Sarah and Hagar. These 2 women are 2 covenants. One from Mount Sinai, bearing the children of slavery. She is Hagar. Now, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. So the reference to Mount Sinai in Arabia, of course, is the foundation for this view that Paul was telling us that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. There are 2 big problems with this. Number 1, Paul identifies what he is saying as an allegory. The first rule of interpreting any piece of literature is if something is an allegory, you don't take anything in it literally. It's all symbolic. That's number 1. Number 2, you have to ask, in the first century, when Paul says Arabia, what did he mean in the first century? In other words, you don't go to a modern Google map and Google Arabia, and aha, there it is. Because where Arabia was in modern times, of course, is very different from where it was in 3,000 years or 2,000 years earlier. Okay? So this is a problem. Herodotus, the Greek geographer, traveler, when he visited Egypt in 450 BC, he described that when he left Egypt, he came to Sinai Arabiacus, Sinai of Arabia. Now, this is 500 years before St. Paul's time. So already in the days of Herodotus, what we today call Sinai was considered part of Arabia. Okay? This is an ancient map made by a monk named Beatus in the 8th century of our era, Christian era, 8th century, but it was based on earlier maps, and I will zoom in a little bit closer so you can see. Here is the Mediterranean, and here is Egypt. You see the Nile. This is the Holy Land, the Dead Sea, and here is Egypt. There's the Nile, and here you see Egypt Superior. And notice the water around Egypt and around Sinai and Arabia is red. the Red Sea. And here is Sinai, and all this area is called Arabia. Here's Judea. So all of this area beside Egypt was called Arabia. Okay, so this would be a time much closer to St. Paul. So my point simply is that what we today call Sinai, during St. Paul's day, and going back even to the days of Herodotus, Sinai was considered Arabia. And of course, the present day map of Saudi Arabia is very different since World War I than it would have been in 2,000 years ago. So this is why you have to look at Galatians and what Paul says from Arabia of Paul's day, not Arabia of today. And it's very clear that Sinai was part of Arabia in Paul's mind. Now, the mountain that some people identify with Mount Sinai is a mountain called Jabal al-Lawz. And I want to draw your attention from this Google Earth image, how many of these mountains, you see how it looks all black on the top. You see all this black, miles and miles of it. Very similar here too in Sinai. Because here now is another Google Earth image of the map. And one of the reasons those identify this mountain as Mount Sinai is because it has this black top. And it is suggested that when the glory of God came on the mountain, that it burnt the stone and turned it black. But as I show you here, here is the area. All of this area has the same geological phenomenon, not just one mountain. And we have the same phenomenon over here in Sinai as well. I will show you a further map of this in a moment, but I want to show you the challenge for the Israelites to get to this location. Here's Jabal al-Lawz, or Jabal al-Lawz, and in order to get there, these are routes proposed by different those who theorize this location. And you see the route they have to go. Do you see this little thing here? That's God telling them to turn back. So they just okay, we have to turn back somewhere. So they turn back here. And down here, and they cross at Nuweiba, and they come to Jabal al-Lawz. The other view has them going down the coast of Sinai and around this way. Okay. The two gentlemen on the left side are American, and the man on the top right is Swedish. None of them are archaeologists. None of them are biblical scholars. This man was a nurse. This man was a policeman in Los Angeles, now sells real estate. This man is a radiologist. None of them trained as archaeologists, none trained as biblical scholars, none read hieroglyphs, none. But these are their locations, and they make wonderful videos and write books, and many people read these and think they're absolutely convinced. Now, the problem is, I didn't convert that. I'm sorry. I thought I converted all my miles to kilometers, but somebody do the math on this. 300 miles to get from Piramesi this way or this way is about 300 miles, which is about 450 kilometers. Can you make this in 3 days walking? Mish ma'ul. Can't do it. And this is the biggest problem for this theory. You cannot walk it in 3 days. In order to do it, you have to change what the Bible says to fit your theory. For me, it's more important to change my theory to fit the biblical data than to change the Bible to fit my theory. Okay. Now, the other question is that those who hold this position believe that Mount Sinai is in Arabia, which the Bible calls Midian, the land of Midian. So where is Midian? We first meet Midian when Moses flees from Pharaoh, And he goes to the land of Midian, and that's where he stayed during his period away from Egypt. And it's true, Midian is in present-day Saudi Arabia. So here is Midian, and it's within here that Jabal al-Lawz is located. And so this is why it is suggested that Mount Sinai is in Arabia, because the land of Midian is in Arabia. However, Midianites are a people who don't live in any one location. They are Bedou. They move within a range of locations. And we know this because when Moses and the Israelites are in the land of Moab, near the Jordan River, they are ready to go into the land of Canaan. And we read here of the people of Moab said to the elders of Midian, this horde, this referring to the Israelites, will devour our land. So Balak, the son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Peor of Pethor. Balaam the prophet lived another 200-300 kilometers north on the Euphrates River, the place of Pethor. So the leaders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with their fees for divination in their land. And they came to Balaam to give him Balak's message. So we notice that Midianites are also living up in Jordan, where Moses and the Israelites are, and they join the Moabites in traveling all the way up to the Euphrates River to purchase the service of the prophet Balaam. So it's clear the Midianites do not live in just one location. They are all over the place. They move around. They're Bedou. So way up here as well as way down here. And what this tells me is that the Midianites are shepherds. They have sheep and goats. And Bedou with sheep and goats tend to be in the southern location during winter months, and during summer months when it's very hot, they tend to move to more northern locations because there's more water. And so this is why you see them moving like this. Now, there are a couple other verses which suggest that when Moses is at Mount Sinai, that he is not in the land of Midian. Look at Exodus 18, 5 and 6. Remember, Moses lived with Jethro, his father-in-law. He married a Midianite woman. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife, Moses' wife and sons, in the wilderness where they encamped at the mountain of God. So it's very clear that Jethro, who has the wife and daughter, sons of Moses, are somewhere else, and they come to Mount Sinai. He, that is Jethro, sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your sons. So we read at the end of the chapter, then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. If Mount Sinai is in Midian, then Jethro does not have to leave his country. He's in his country. But he's leaving Mount Sinai and going back to his country. It shows that they're not the same place. The same thing is true in Numbers chapter 10. This comes at the end of the period of the wilderness at Sinai, and Israel is ready to leave. And Moses says to Hobab, the son of Ruel, the son of Jethro, the Midianite, he says, we are setting out to a place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us to the promised land. We will do you good. There's that word again. For the Lord has promised good to Israel. But he said to him, no, I'm not going to go with you. I will not go. I will depart to my own land. So again, this is a man speaking at Mount Sinai, and Moses says, no, I'm going back to my own country. So twice, both Jethro and his son Hobab say, wherever Mount Sinai is, it's not my country. We're going back to our country. So you can't have it both ways. All right. Let me just finish this section up and we'll take a break in 5 minutes, okay? Now, this area here, if one were to cross it, of course, after Islam came to Egypt, a route was established across here called Darb al-Hajj, because pilgrims came from Egypt to go to Mecca, and to go by land, the shortest way is to go across this area here. This area is extremely difficult to travel, the area in the red circle. If you see the white lines, these are all wadis. And if you travel across, you see today there's a road to Eilat that goes from Suez. But to travel in ancient times would require going up and down, up and down, up and down. Very difficult to travel across the wadis. Most of the time, if you travel in a wadi. It's like being on a road. But traveling across, very difficult. And you have to imagine the Egyptian horses and chariots coming after them going across wadis. This is impossible to think about this. So, this is basically the modern road covers the ancient Darb al-Hajj, and one has to imagine the Israelites coming across this road and then coming down to Nuweiba and crossing this area. Now, let me go back to the mountain, Jabal al-Lawz, for a minute, and then we'll take a break. Geologists have studied this area. This is a geological map. And so the different colors that you see here represent different types of igneous rock, volcanic rock. And the darkest stone is Hadiyah slate. It's slate. This is where you get the black, or the green stone, which is also a dark, almost black stone. Now, if you pull away this map, you can see what this looks like today, aerial view. This is the so-called black with this green stone. And all these stones are granite type, volcanic or igneous rock. So if you drilled a hole here, you would go down hundreds and hundreds of meters and you'd have the same black stone. It's not just a surface burn caused by fire. It's the kind of rock. So to suggest this was somehow the glory of God, the fire on the mountain made this all happen is very difficult. And as I showed you before, this same kind of rock is all over northern Arabia and Sinai. So unless you want to say that all this area was affected by the glory of God, here's a good look at it.